you have problems, the conclusion is we're gonna give all problems to Julia and she will help us through. So here is one, if you wanna try, we'll do a little test. If you can participate in this poll, what is your favorite fall activity? I noticed that attending Dean Dorton's risk management seminar is not on here. That's a change we need to make for next year. But we have apple picking, carving pumpkins, corn mazes, watching football, or other.
2, 2, 3, 3, 3.
Stop talking and continue. Anybody in the room having trouble? I still see some people. Is everyone live polling or still people?
Still trying to get in.
Text Dean Dorton.
Okay. There. How about I do that? Help.
Oh, the text. Yeah, that's what I want
In the
to
body.
know. Next game is a whole other
Who brought it back? Question on who?
except it changes it.
Oh, I don't. Dave, do you need help?
Does the question come up?
Oh, now I do it? You guys ready for me to? Okay. All right. Julia, can you tell how many people are, can I move on or?
I would give it another second.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not popping up for me.
It's not popping up for you. Okay.
I mean, it says waiting for the presentation.
Oh, you just put the answer in the text.
Did you text Dean Dorton as one word?
Yep. I mean, I'm in the poll everywhere.
Oh, okay.
I want to say this again, for those of you attending virtually, if you have any technical issues, you can reach out to Julia Ray at deandorton.com. That's JRAY at deandorton.com. Julia's sitting in the back of the room with our tech department and she will keep you moving along. Julia, I'm waiting. Can I go ahead and go on? Okay. Does anyone in the room need help with the
Holy.
polling? Just raise your hand and Julia, you do? Okay, Julia, can you help him? And then we're gonna move on. There you go. If you're having problems, reach out to Julia Ray. If you would like to ask questions, virtual attendees, if you have questions for our presenters, please type your question in the chat box at the bottom right hand of your screen and then click the send button. A Dean Dorton representative is monitoring the chat and we will ask the questions at the appropriate time on your behalf. Virtual attendees, event materials, copies of the presentations, speaker bios, and all other event materials can be found at the bottom of the event page in the section titled Documents to Download. This event webpage was emailed to all registrants earlier this week, so please reach out to Julia Ray immediately if you're having trouble accessing the site. Okay, for those of you that want CPE, there's a slide, sorry, I should have done it, presentations to download. For CPE credit, please pay attention. This might be a change from previous and I don't want you to be disappointed. In order to get CPE, you have to be an active participant. You need to attend all of the sessions. You need to answer all polling questions. And here's the part that I really want our virtual attendees to pay attention to. You need to keep the presentation screen up as your main active window. If you switch to other programs or applications, I think we call this dual tasking, or if you're utilizing two monitors, your CPE time will be deducted. And so I'd hate to see that happen to you. CPE certificates will be issued by us within 2 weeks. If you have any questions on that, as per usual, get with Julia Ray. Okay. Now, I feel like I just scolded everyone about CPE, so now I'm going to give you good news. We do have a nice door prize today. It's a Yeti portable cooler. The winner will be drawn at random for our attendee list for both in-person and virtual attendees. Everyone is eligible except Dean Dorton employees. For Those in person, there's a form over here for you to fill out. And for virtual, I just lost my place, Julia, for those attending.
I'll be putting it in,
You'll be putting it in the chat, so pay attention to the chat, and Julia will give you a chance to register for it, and we'll do it at the 10:20 break. All right, so with that, if there are no logistical questions, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our first speaker, Jim Tencza. Jim Tencza has worked in public accounting since 1990. He focuses in assurance, audit, accounting, and business advisory services to organizations of various sizes and industries. When I say audit, and I'm talking about Jim, I don't mean just external, I mean internal audit as well. With more than 15 years' experience as an audit partner, Jim has extensive experience with leading financial statement audits and dealing with complex audit, accounting, and financial reporting matters. Jim is a member of our firm's nonprofit industry team and leads many audits of nonprofit entities. Throughout his career, he has worked with various types of nonprofit organizations, including public charities, social advocacy organizations, foundations, colleges and universities, elementary schools, high schools, and associations. And so with that, I will turn it over to Jim.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Good morning, everyone. Good to see people here in person. All right, I guess a few things before I get started. I guess Julia, I'm assuming everyone can hear us fine remotely, everything's good. And I do want to reiterate, we really do want you all to ask questions, those here in person and in Raleigh in person and online. All of our presenters are not going to take up the full amount of time. We're going to leave time for questions. We want to talk about the things that are important to you all, so we really appreciate the questions. Secondly, just to expand a little bit on Dean Dorton, we do work with 20 to 30 companies and organizations as their co-sourced or outsourced internal audit department. And we provide internal audit and risk management consulting services to many, many more organizations. Many of those are nonprofits. So we have a great amount of experience. Lastly, I am a very proud grandfather. I have a granddaughter, 1 year old, Mia. So don't be surprised if during my presentation, if a picture of her pops up or something, all right? So. I was going to have one in there, shoot. I didn't get it in there in time. For our session today, we're going to spend our time discussing the top risks facing nonprofit organizations, and we're going to discuss the ever-changing and increasing risk of cybersecurity as it relates to nonprofits. Okay, we're going to try this polling question again, see if we can get it to work here. There will be polling sessions for everyone. So this one here, we just want to get a little better idea of the people that are here today and in person, again, so we can kind of structure our comments accordingly. The bad thing about us who wear glasses, I can't see that back screen. All right. I'll give you just a few more minutes, but as I suspected, a fair amount of CFO, controller, accounting people, but a good mix of others and executive directors and board members. It's all good. Okay. Enough time? Okay. All right. So we thought it'd be good to start today with the top risks for nonprofit organizations. And this list of risks was developed from information provided by the Institute of Internal Auditors. We also gathered information from a publication called the North American Pulse of Internal Audit. And we gathered this just from our own experience of working with a lot of nonprofits in the region. I will say that this is not a complete list of the high risks for all nonprofits and private companies. Different organizations may have high risks that are not on this list, so this list is not all encompassing. And, depending on type of nonprofit organization or company that you're with, there could be different risks. And this is not in order of the highest to lowest risk or anything like that. It's just in the order in which I wanted to talk about them. So first on the list is cybersecurity, and we did put that one first for a few reasons. One, it generally is the top risk at most organizations, and it is for every industry that, no matter what industry you're in. And it seems like every seminar that you go to that's like this, you're going to hear about cybersecurity. And I continue to hear here in the region about a lot of ransomware attacks. In this last couple months, I know 3 companies that have had a ransomware attack. So this is, ever growing, ever changing. And we are going to talk about this a little bit further in the presentation. So I will not say anything further right now, but we'll come back to this one here in a little bit. Next on the list is data privacy risk, and it is closely related to cybersecurity, but there are many times that data is leaked by accident or no fraudulent activities. And you really need to make sure you have good controls over data, especially donor information, credit card information, employee information. I think that's pretty obvious, but you need to make sure you have good policies and practices in place. And the big thing is only certain people in your organization should have access to certain information. And you need to make sure that you emphasize the importance of keeping this information confidential and being careful with it. A lot of times what we see is just a simple email. Someone sends the email to the wrong person. I actually got an email earlier this week from one of my clients talking about a potential acquisition. It was not meant for me. It was meant for someone else in their organization. And that happens quite frequently nowadays. People, in our organization, if you put the first 2 letters in, a name pops up. And I don't know how many times we got Chris Boylan and Cole Bruner, and I swear I send the wrong email to those guys every day. And so it's real easy to do, and you just need to be really careful, and your employees need to be conscious of this. And there's other things that happen, just people getting computers stolen or things happen like that. So you need to make sure only certain people have access to certain information and good controls around that. The second biggest risk besides cybersecurity in all organizations right now is related to hiring and retaining employees and board members. We continue to see organizations have a difficult time identifying and hiring employees. Companies continue to try to be very creative in a lot of things that they're doing as far as incentives for employees. Things like being more flexible, remote working options, 4-day weeks, limitless PTO, all those kinds of things people are doing. But it's really hard to really hire the right people. We also have seen organizations trying to retrain or refocus some of their people so they can do a little bit more versus hiring. And our next session is completely, dedicated to this topic. So I don't want to steal anyone's thunder. And so we have a good group of people in here that are going to be talking about that. And I think we'll have a good discussion in the next session. Then many nonprofits rely heavily on volunteers and third parties. Many of them provide services and do things that are really helpful for the organization and can take the place of employees. And while this is a great way to reduce some of your costs, there's various risks that nonprofits face with using volunteers and other third parties. A lot of times those volunteers, have good intentions, but they don't necessarily understand all the policies, procedures. Then some volunteers may not have good intentions. And I've had the privilege of working with a lot of schools, college, universities, school districts. I'm on the board of a high school, and there's a ton of volunteers that help in those organizations, but a lot of those volunteers are really more concerned about their own child and what they're involved with, and boosters and PTAs are good examples. A lot of those volunteers, you know, they want what's best for that club or organization, but they really want what's best for their child, and they're trying to do things, and so they may not really align with what you're trying to do, and like I said, many of these volunteers may not know the policies and procedures. I was actually the treasurer of the athletic board for a school, and this was a few years back, but the coaches were required to collect the fees from all of the parents. And so I kept hounding the soccer coach. I'm like, did you collect those fees? Did you collect those fees? He goes, yeah, I'm getting them. And so like 3 months later, I finally got, it was like $3,000 cash and checks. And I learned that he had it sitting, most of it in his glove box in his car. And he was trying to collect all the money from all of the parents, and he wanted to get it all before he handed it over. And I told him, I said, I don't think that's really in line with the policies that we have here at the school. But again, the person just didn't really know. And some people just don't understand some of those things. But anyway, so as far as fraud, theft, or misuse of funds by employees or third parties, that's a huge risk for nonprofits who rely on donations and federal funding for a significant portion of their revenue. Nobody wants to give money to an organization who is not using it properly or has had thefts in the past. Many nonprofits continue to have cash donations, and many of the nonprofits don't really have all of the controls in place. So that is also a risk. Fundraising fraud is something that continues to increase in risk. And so fundraising fraud basically is, and you see it now, especially if there's some kind of tragedy that occurs, someone will set up some sort of nonprofit organization, GoFundMe page or something like that. And it's really not a legitimate nonprofit, and they get people to donate, and that money's not going to a nonprofit, it's going in their pocket. And you think, well, that doesn't really impact our nonprofit, but it might, because I think everyone now is a little bit leery about donating whenever, especially when there's some sort of tragedy. I know when we had the unfortunate shootings here in downtown Louisville, Old National Bank, a lot of us wanted to donate. We knew some of those people. We wanted to donate, and then we're kind of real hesitant. Well, wait, where's this money really going? And so, if you're a nonprofit, and you're doing those things, you need to make sure you're making it clear that it's a legitimate cause, a legitimate thing that you're doing here. And so, that's a real risk for nonprofits. Economic and political environment always has an impact on the amount of contributions that you receive, and the performance of investments also has a big impact on nonprofits. Obviously, most nonprofits have some sort of endowments or funds set aside, and we really encourage nonprofits to have good advisors on their board when it comes to investments. Unfortunately, we've seen some nonprofits where the executive director is coming up with the investment policy or determining how to do certain things, and that's not really the best person to do it. We really encourage, and I know we're going to have a session here about the makeup of your board, but having people on your board that really have good investment knowledge is really, really helpful to make sure you get diversified, and so when our crazy market goes way down, it doesn't cause a big impact. The thing you need to be careful with, though, when we've seen this on nonprofits, is as they rotate board members off and they get different people on, some of these investment advisors, they have a little bit different views on what you should be doing. And so we've seen some nonprofits seem like every 3 or 6 years kind of change their strategy of what they're doing. And so you need to be careful about that. We recommend really kind of best practice is to have some sort of third party investment company to kind of supplement with your board and maybe help you. A lot of those investment advisors will do that fairly cheap and maybe even free for some nonprofits. So having them involved might be good to supplement whatever you have on the board. Of course, trying to minimize costs and expenses is always a key focus of nonprofits. But it's especially important right now. Seems like cost of everything continues to go up. And while you're trying to minimize your costs, it's also important to make sure that your costs are really going to your programs and not to other areas. You know, many significant donors will look at that. Will look at how much your money's going to program services versus general and admin. And I know there's, you know, GuideStar has some things out there, kind of targets that you should have as far as the percentage of money spent on program services. You just need to be careful about that because different nonprofits should have different targets. So like colleges and universities and schools might be a little bit different than a charitable organization versus a foundation. You know, the amount of the percentage they're going to program services could be very different. But that is something as a nonprofit you want is a risk to make sure that you're spending that money wisely. When we talk about regulatory compliance for nonprofits, we're mainly talking about maintaining your tax exempt status. It seems like that gets harder and harder every year, always more regulations, things going on, dealing with unrelated business income and other things. So obviously losing your tax exempt status would be a big problem. And so that's one of the key regulatory things, but there's also things like new accounting rules. There's different rules for different states, debt compliance. So there's a bunch of things like that, and a lot of nonprofits may not have as big of accounting department as you'd like, so it may be hard to maintain and continue to meet all the regulatory requirements. We also have included ESG, environmental, social governance matters on this list. And for some nonprofits, this can be a very big risk. For example, it is really huge at colleges and universities. I have a son that's recently gone to college. They're all looking at how green the college is, the diversity of the university. So those types of things are really, really important for colleges and universities. So, you know, making sure that you're doing the things to have those right things in place, but also what we're seeing is there's not a lot of rigor around that information. So I don't know, the college says they're 98% green. How do we really know they're 98% green? And who's monitoring that? Where'd they get that information from? And, you know, from being involved in a lot of different things, a lot of this information can be tweaked. I know us as a firm, like one of the big business first comes out with a list of largest CPA firms in Jefferson County. And they ask for the number of employees, the number of CPAs in Jefferson County. Well, we've got a bunch of employees that work remotely. Do we count them? We have Louisville and Lexington offices. We have people that work in both offices. How do we count them? It's real easy to take some of that information and manipulate it to be what you want it to be. And that's what we're seeing in the CSG space is a lot of organizations kind of reporting things. And that could almost be worse if you report something and it's not true. You know, that could be a big problem. And then last on the list, and not because it's the least risky, but because it's more of a kind of a catch-all, is reputation damage. So many of the things I talked about here could cause some reputation damage at an organization, fraud, third parties, data breaches. But there's many other things that can cause damage. You know, if your executive director does something inappropriate, or we were just talking, you know, before this, I had the pleasure of working with Jefferson County Public Schools, and you can't get the kids on the buses to the schools. Obviously, that causes a lot of reputational damage to that organization. So, and you know, for nonprofits that are relying on donations, that can really have a huge impact. This other slide I wanted to share with you all, and it may be a little hard to read, although it looks pretty good. But this is the risk levels that come from the 2023 North American Pulse of Internal Audit. And I included this slide because it's interesting to see the risks that are deemed as high or very high across the whole country. So they do this is kind of across the whole country. And this shows the risk levels for the public sector and nonprofits. So the public sector is basically government agencies. And you can see there the top 4 risks on each of those are the same, and they're on our list at cybersecurity, IT, third-party relationships, and then compliance regulatory. It's interesting though, if you go through the rest of these, the only one that's really different between governments and nonprofits is cost expense reduction. Not to say anything bad about our government agencies, but saving costs is not as high on their risk as it is for nonprofits. But it's just kind of interesting to see the different risks here across the country and between the government and nonprofits. And one of the key things that I want you to take away from this is that risks are different for everyone in every organization. And again, whether you're a school, a foundation, or the type of organization you are, your risk could be very different. We recommend that every organization go through and do a risk assessment. You really need to know what are your key risks and what are you doing to mitigate those. And I'll do a little plug here, but Dean Dorton, we do a lot of risk assessments, a lot of nonprofits. We develop some special tools. We can come in and help you do that. I'm glad to talk to you about that. But it is important. Our organization, we go through it annually and do a risk assessment, and you really need to understand what your key risks are and make sure you're addressing those. So I hope you found this helpful. I'm gonna pause right now and bring Jason Miller up here to talk about cybersecurity because you don't want me to. Jason leads our entire consulting practice at Dean Dorton. At Dean Dorton, we have audit, tax, and consulting. Jason leads the consulting practice, and especially our technology consulting. Jason spends a lot of time in cybersecurity, so he will talk about that for a little bit.
Thank you, Jim. So as Jim mentioned, cybersecurity is one of the top risks for any organization these days, and that has been true and continues to be true. And not only is it a specific area, but it touches on a number of the areas Jim mentioned, such as data privacy, fraud, and reputational risk. Because if you do have a breach, you have a duty to notify people. So, it's one of those things that gets out and you don't really want that kind of publicity. So it is an important thing, and I spent a lot of time talking about it, and we're just going to hit a couple of key points. Jim asked me to hit on a couple of things that we're seeing, just kind of some highlights. And if you've heard me talk about cyber in the last couple of years, I usually end with the one thing, because I throw a lot of stuff at people. And most people want to know if I can only do one, because I got limited budget and resources and time, what do I do? And historically, that's been multi-factor authentication. It still is, but it's an example of things continue to evolve. So 2 years ago, a lot of people didn't have what we refer to as MFA, and people started to hear that, started to move in that direction. And it got to the point where insurance companies wouldn't even sign a cyber policy for somebody if you didn't check the box that said you had MFA. So we've made a lot of progress, but so have the threat actors. And about a year to 18 months ago, we saw a situation with a client that really caused me pause, because the area where MFA has been in place the longest has been banks, right? Most banks kind of forced that access control years ago. We started to see a new attack surface that was getting around MFA. So that was kind of troubling. So an example, Jim mentioned risk assessment and annual. You can't ever think that you've gotten to the point of protection and you're safe, because the risk and the threats continue to evolve. And so we need to look at that annually so that we know additional enhancements that we need to take. The second area, and I'm gonna dig a little more into the MFA thing, but the second area that we see a lot of issues with, and our cyber team does a lot of incident response around, is compromises to organizations' Microsoft Office 365. So most organizations have shifted to that as not only their email system, but general business storage of key documents and information. And we probably respond to 2 or 3 incidents a month related to organizations' Office 365 getting compromised. So we'll touch on that just a little bit. So what happened in this bank situation that allowed a threat actor to get around the multi-factor authentication the bank had put in place and allowed a threat actor to access the client's bank account and wire money to some international accounts? And you're thinking, this is, it's a pretty big deal. So it's what we call an adversary in the middle attack. And so in this particular instance, and we're seeing a lot of these, this is ramped up a lot. There's actually a third-party dark web cyber criminal enterprise that's selling tools to allow people to do this. So it makes it simple for it to happen. But in the particular instance that we responded to firsthand for a client was the controller Googles the bank website rather than having a specific place she went. And the threat actors had registered a domain that was very similar and worked to get it higher in the list. So she sees it, thinks it's her bank, clicks on it, brings up a page, the man in the middle page that looks exactly like her bank login page. So she enters her user ID and her password. And so it sends it across, and they grab that information in the middle, sends it to the regular site. The regular site responds and says, okay, give me your MFA. And the person puts in their MFA token or code, and it comes back through. They grab it, and then they go onto the site, and they redirect the user. So they, within seconds, are into the bank site and actually lock out the client from access to their bank. So all this is happening really quick, and this particular client had a 6-figure loss on this situation. So there are varying levels to multi-factor authentication. And so it's really important now to say, not only do we need MFA, but do we need the right type of MFA? And usually we see some enterprise solutions like Duo, Okta, RSA are some of the common ones. But there are different categories and levels. And so it's one of those things that, we train people to say, do we have MFA in place? But now you got to go one step further and say, do we have the right level of MFA in place? And you're going to probably start to see this on your insurance renewals as those continue to progress. And it gets harder and harder to even respond to these insurance policy questionnaires because of the evolution of all these things. So the other area I mentioned was the Microsoft Office 365. And so most people think I'm going to outsource my email to Microsoft. They're going to take care of me. Well, that's not the case. They will give you access to solutions to control and secure your environment, but it is your responsibility to do so. And there are multiple different levels of those subscriptions with varying degrees of security as well. So as you're subscribing to your licensing solution, you've got to understand the different levels, and you have to apply the techniques in place to be able to get that level of control. And so, it's not as simple as I just go out and subscribe and away we go, because there are at least 12 different things Microsoft recommends. I'm not going to touch on all of those. But the other thing is we're seeing the need for layered protection. So, Microsoft has some solutions to protect you, but we're seeing the need for the MFA, so a third-party one like the Okta or the Duo or something that checks the box on the more advanced protection, a next-generation antivirus to protect your end users, a web filter to try to avoid users being able to get to those fake adversarial sites, and then an advanced email protection. So Microsoft has like a spam filter and some basic protections, But our cyber team is recommending, and we actually implement third-party solutions on top of that to try to protect our users from getting those adversarial phishing emails. And it used to be, you could look at those and say, yeah, this looks fake because of all the broken English, but we're seeing artificial intelligence and generative AI are actually generating phishing emails that look better than most of us could type with our standard English and grammar. So long gone are the days where you look at it and it's all broken up or wrong name. The generative AI are actually getting very sophisticated in that. So the key is have a good information security program in place. And with that, we want to focus on our people, our technology, and our processes. So our people are our biggest threat and weakness. We're usually trusting individuals. Now, maybe some of the CPAs in the room are not as trusting, but most of our users are pretty trusting. And so we've got to educate them on the things that they need to be aware of. We need to have that layered tool technology in place, and then we need to have processes. Processes for annual risk assessment, processes for incident response. There's a whole list of controls that we want to have in place to protect our organization. And again, a couple other key considerations. Do you have the right tools in place? Do you have a cyber assessment done by a third party? So you think you're doing things, but has somebody validated it? Kind of like an audit, validate your financials. We do assessments that validate our security. Again, train our users, and then have a way to know if you have an issue. You have monitoring tools in place. So if you do have a problem, you actually are aware of it and can respond. Any questions for anything I covered or that Jim covered? Elizabeth?
Question for you. The example you gave of our client controller who went to Google and then selected the wrong website.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know if when they selected that website, if they were looking up at the URL, would there have been that little lock in the top left?
It could have. I mean, you could, the adversary, I don't know specifically on that case. I didn't personally investigate it. The rest, somebody on our cyber team did. But they could have. I mean, they could easily have had a secure certificate on it.
Okay.
It's more about, is it the right address?
Right.
And again, those are somewhat tricky if they get, something looks very close and you don't recognize it. The key there is to have a favorite link and not Google your critical access sites. Any other questions for Jim or myself?
You guys gonna make these slides available somehow? You guys gonna
Yes.
make these slides
Yes.
available? Okay.
Yes.
Sorry, I was looking at the boss.
They will also be sending out a recording of this presentation as well. So all materials and a recording will be resent at the end of this.
Question, kind of an old school control is to pick up the phone and call someone at the bank and make sure everything's
That's
good.
if
What are
you're
we-
initiating a wire, but in this particular instance, that wasn't even, they weren't trying to do anything other than log into the bank, so they had no
Are we
idea.
Seeing where people are manipulating phone numbers where you think you're talking to someone, but you're talking to a bad actor? Has it gone to that level?
I'm sure there are some examples of that. I haven't seen that as a very prominent situation.
I didn't know with AI if that's gonna become problematic where
It
voice-
definitely could. I'm a proponent of AI and the future of what it's doing. I'm not the doom and gloom outlook on it. We're gonna have a session at our annual accounting and ethics update to talk about the benefits of it. But as with everything in our society, someone figures out how to take a good thing and turn it into a bad thing and manipulate it. So you're gonna see instances where AI is wonderful and helps move and progress us, but it's also got its challenges as well when it makes, the threat actors have better access to tools. But the issue with the Microsoft breaches are more what, Bill, you're referring to is, you can't have email approvals for fund transfers with the bank or internal because the compromises to our email accounts allow people to stage those intercept them and create, wrong things. So picking up the phone and calling is a control in that situation to confirm large transfers. But in the particular example I gave, that wasn't even part of the situation. It was the threat actor just took control of the account and started, created their own users and started doing things. Any other questions? All right, I believe we have a 5-minute break. Is that right, Julia? All right, 5-minute break, and then we'll be back with our next session.
Well, if
Wow,
we-
okay.
15 seconds.
This one's always pretty good.
How
We're
is
the
it?
tight ship.
Yeah.
I think she's doing the thing, she's in this, but I know she's.
Am I good to go?
It's not.
All right, welcome back, everybody. It's my pleasure to introduce Jamie Bierman with HR Elements. HR Elements is one of our preferred business partners, and they are a professional human resources and consulting group focused on co-sourced and outsourced HR management, organizational development, and talent acquisition. Jamie brings nearly 20 years of strategic HR experience in manufacturing, retail, and business service industries. She understands the impact of company culture and overall business performance and the employee experience and strives to make a positive impact on the business through the culture and HR initiatives. Jamie's passion for private business and employee experience led her to HR Elements. Jamie earned her bachelor's degree in HR and finance from Miami University and holds her Society for Human Resources Management Senior Certified Professional Credential. Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you. All right. Good morning, everybody. So when I was in college studying finance and HR, I thought I wanted to be a recruiter, really a headhunter. Right? My dad was saying, that's where the money is, that's what you should do. And, just bringing a little levity, this is a fun infographic, what people thought I did, right? As a recruiter, you're going out, you're having fun, you're charging clients. But really what it is a lot of stress. It's frustrating now to be a recruiter. So as I became one, I spent probably the first 3 years outside of college really just focusing on recruiting. And I was recruiting salespeople. So some ways I felt, oh, it went out again, but it's up here. Okay, was Adele a recruiter in a past life? Hello, from the other side, I must have called you 1,000 times, right? You feel like a professional stalker. This is my favorite one though, and this is really now. An applicant is somebody who shows up for an interview. An applicant doesn't. So, I learned a really important fact, which is one does not simply just go recruiting, right? It's a lot harder than that. So we're gonna start with a poll. So who is responsible within your organization for handling recruiting? All right, it's continuing to change, but I am seeing one very large 2-letter acronym in the middle, HR, right? That's what a lot of organizations think. That's what a lot of businesses think. Somebody's catching on. I'm gonna try to see what. Everyone really is responsible for recruiting. Every single person within your business. But it's a huge strategy, and that's what we're gonna talk about today. So recruiting is part of your organizational strategy. You need to think about it in a variety of different ways. First is with your strategic plan, right? We can't recruit in the moment, and when we're not starting with a future-facing plan, we're really setting ourselves up for failure. I like to be looking at least 3 years into the future. We need to know what our growth is gonna be, what's the plan, so that we know the right types of people to be adding to our staff, but also how do we want to develop and continue to cultivate the careers of those individuals that we're recruiting now for our current need, but also for our future need. Also the financial piece. What are all of these folks gonna cost us? Our total target headcount, right, that TTC, but it's much more than just their pay. We need to take into consideration how that pay may change year over year. What is the cost of benefits, incentive pay as part of that total rewards? But also a benefit that organizations are really overlooking right now is that work-life balance. We probably talk about it and hear about it a lot. It's a big piece, and it is something that's part of that organizational strategy. So the value proposition. When I first heard about a value proposition, that was for us to sell our products and services to clients, right? What is that value prop for those clients to work with our organization, our business, to sell them a product? But we're really changing in our culture. The messaging that we send to all potential employees is the value proposition for them putting their career, attached to your organization, your business. And even some things that Jim had talked about, right? If there is a ED within your organization that maybe does something, it damages the reputation. That becomes, a poor potential part of that value proposition or that brand in the marketplace for potential employees. So we need to talk about what that potential career experience is going to be like. Who are those employees so that there's that brand recognition, as well as what are those current and then future opportunities for professional growth. And then you have to have an effective process. Right now, we're seeing candidates that may go to an interview in the morning and they could be off the market by lunchtime. So it needs to be effective, but it also needs to be thorough, long enough and short enough. What's that happy balance so that we can get candidates interested in part of that culture where they're really ready to wait. They're not just looking for a job. They're looking to become part of your business. So these are some things we'll be talking about. So first, that employment brand. It is a big message. So it's going to help position your organization as an employer of choice in the marketplace. It needs to be compelling, so really action-oriented to those potential employees, but give them a great picture of what it's like to work there. So this is going to be some online, but also even just things that your employees are sharing. When somebody says, oh, what do you do? Their response is going to be part of that employer brand. So it clearly communicates, one, of course, what their role, their area of expertise is, but why they love working within your organization. And it really is going to reinforce the public image over and over and over again for potential employees. But hey, maybe also donors, board members. It could be a variety of different things to drive appropriate traffic towards your organization. So when we think about the employment value proposition that I mentioned a little while ago, that's a big piece of that employment brand, right? So it's going to be that magnet. It's going to really get people to be sticky to what your organization is all about for employment. So it's going to talk to the top talent in the marketplace about why should they be interested in working within your organization? Why do they want to be associated with your brand? And also, why would they want to stay? So you're not just talking to potential employees, you're talking to your current employees and continuing to reinforce why they're dedicating their time within your organization. So it really is congruent and connected to whatever that actual marketing brand, that sales brand about your organization. So they need to be connected and be saying the same things to be effective. So I have a couple of different samples up. So, and again, this is not the whole employment brand. This is the employment value proposition. So this first one here is Yelp. And their, main value prop is we play well with others. I thought it was really interesting because it's not, when I go to Yelp on my phone, I don't necessarily think about this. I'm just looking for a quick Yelp review. But they're just talking about what it's like to work there, right? So our values are important at Yelp, play well with others. They are what drive us forward, all right? This other one is Unilever, and it's probably hard to see, but so the website says that at Unilever is the place where you can bring your purpose to life through the work that you do, creating a better business and a better world. You will work with brands that are loved and improve the lives of our consumers and the communities around us. So I really liked this value proposition. It's gonna talk to potential employees about why they're gonna feel great working there, right? You're bringing your purpose to life. So it's that connection. And then this last one I really liked, and it's for an organization I had not heard of before. It's Pizza. And so it's all about the path, right? No ceilings at Pizza. So we employ a strict no ceiling policy. So you can start at the bottom and go just as high as your wings will take you. No restrictions, no limits, no preconceived judgment about your proper place. We take you for you. I'm not gonna read the rest of it, but I really liked this because if you think about working in a pizza shop, all right, it's probably a short-term job, not a career, right? Maybe you're making pizza, maybe you're a delivery driver, whatever it is. But Pizza is saying, hey, no. You might start doing that, but you could become an owner of an Pizza shop. So it really does communicate kind of and get that hook in about what individually a job seeker might be looking for and really getting them connected towards the future. So we've seen quite a few different things here and just a few samples, again, of the employment value proposition. So thinking about where do you start if you don't have one, or maybe it's time to do a little bit of a brush up. So first is really reflecting on how are we, the organization as an employer, how are you perceived now? Probably a great way to find that out is to do a survey of your employees, even potential employees at the conclusion of an interview process, right? You got to get some data, got to get some information. You also need to know who your employment competition is. When I talk to nonprofits, it used to be that, well, it was just other nonprofits, right? If you're an employee and you work in a nonprofit, it's because you love nonprofits. That's not necessarily true. It's the same competition, right? In the for-profit or nonprofit. And really, nonprofits kind of have a little bit of a leg up sometimes with the EVP creation, because you're really able to talk about why you're there, why your nonprofit exists to better the community or work for a cause. And it's a lot easier to really create that, to get the hook in and communicate that continuity in the marketplace. But the employment competition is really the available workforce potentially. Strengths and weaknesses of the organization, again, really thinking towards the future. How are you and your organization going to change, and how are people going to become part of that change and growth strategy? I always like to talk about the WIFM, the what's in it for me, for potential employees. This is where we're going to be talking about kind of that second quadrant I had shared on one of the initial slides about total rewards. So yes, people do like to get paid for their work. We want to make sure that we're competitive, we're appropriate, that we are incenting with a good benefits package, but really that work-life balance is a pretty big part of that. That is a true value to businesses and to their employees. So really communicating, why should somebody want to work for you? What are they going to get out of it in addition to just having a career and experience? And again, reflect on if that brand, that employment brand, is consistent with what your brand towards the market is. They really need to complement one another and be congruent. If they contradict something's not right. Somebody's fooling themselves somewhere. So then when you think about communicating it, again, this employment brand, your culture, is talking to both your current employees. We need to always remind them why they work for us. That's the retention piece that we're talking about today, but also attracting. So it's one message internally, it's one message externally. It's the same. But in continuing to communicate that message internally, we're educating our employees to become the best recruiters we have, right? They're gonna wanna bring people like them or who they trust or respect into the organization. So one message, very succinct, very consistent, easy to understand and remember. So then it's adapting the message, putting it together in your recruiting materials, making sure your process reflects and continues to reinforce the message, making sure that it's easy for people to understand and learn. We do want to reflect the values of the organization. Again, if you reflect on that Yelp value prop, it was really all about their values and fitting in and why people would want to work. Hey, we're nice to each other. We play well with others. It's pretty easy to remember. You should think about your ROI. It's not going to be a 1-week project to get an EVP created, communicated, and the work is done. It's going to take time. It's going to take money, advertising, marketing. So do think about that ROI, right? It is probably something that you can keep fairly simple. The important part is the communication of that message. And then you need to assess it, right? Give it some time. Let's see if it's making a difference. That could be something that your initial recruiting team is asking about during the phone screening. It's also something that you can assess internally to make sure your employees are sticky to it and they understand what it means. Oops. Here we go. So, do you know your employment brand or your employment value proposition? All right. Good. So I love the number of yeses. That's great news. But really, I was expecting a lot of the maybe, and it's because it's really a little bit ambiguous sometimes. Organizations maybe haven't communicated it out effectively, or maybe it's just your values, but you're not sure how to work it in to being a true value proposition or part of that employment brand. So definitely some folks who maybe need to just reflect a little bit, maybe put a little bit of a survey together to understand what do your employees think your value proposition is. Sometimes they're going to give you some really great feedback that could change a little bit about the way that you think. And I like, it's 6%, so it's certainly a low part of the population today, but hey, we do need some help. We need to dust some things off and work on it. So having that employment value proposition as part of that brand is the first step in attracting talent. So we're going to talk about recruiting. So come join our team. We need to work together. And I forget what organization this was. I think it was like 2 Men in a Truck maybe. But when you think about a job posting, it is still important, but it's not the main way to recruit. A posting looks completely different today than maybe what we thought about 20 years ago. It's brief, really short. It needs to be bright, eye-catchy, and it needs to be bold, right? We want people to say, I want to work at that company, right? Chances are if they're out on Indeed or some search engine for positions, they're looking for a certain title, right? What do they do? What is their skill? And then the connectivity is going to be what you say in this very brief posting. So again, that's why the value proposition is so important. We want to intrigue and connect to those job searchers. So the posting is going to describe the organization, right? 4 or 5 sentences. In the actual position detail, just what are those most effective and important duties that this person is going to be responsible for? Any specific type of responsibilities, and then any appropriate disclaimers. I'm an HR professional. I love compliance. We want to make sure we're still tagging in, affirmative action if that's needed, drug-free workplace, any type of physical requirements. But also don't just take the job descriptions that you may have had for the past 15 years at face value. Jobs are gonna change over time. And really, if they're not being looked at and evaluated probably every 18 months or so, they're probably inaccurate. So make sure that that's a part of your annual strategy, is ensuring that your jobs are up to date so that it's really easy to make sure you have an appropriate posting to attract that talent. But really the key, it was called the ABCs, it's always be connecting, right? This is where you get your referrals, the talent pipeline. You're thinking about potentially succession planning. Certainly partnering with educational institutions, schools where they may have a great feeder program where you can grab that fresh talent. That's great for the growth, but sometimes you're gonna need somebody to just step right in and know exactly what they're doing. So potentially looking at career fairs, but also blogs. LinkedIn is a big one. People in a professional network should always be talking about their organization. Again, you're sharing your value proposition. You're talking about why you love working for your company. People are going to remember that. They're going to connect you to your company and what that company is about. But never start recruiting just when you have the need. Always be recruiting, always be connecting, so that you know what people are looking for and where they may be a great fit for your company. We just hired somebody 3 weeks ago. She started. We actually started recruiting her probably a year ago, maybe more. We've been talking to her, meeting with her, just chatting with her about what she was looking for. She lived in Utah. We're a Cincinnati, Ohio-based organization. So I've been connecting with her when she was in town. She was relocating. I met her for coffee, introduced her to some of other team members. So she really had a great idea of who HR Elements was and why she wanted to work for us. And it was wonderful because we were really able to identify that we had a fit. And then when the timing was right, both for her, but for HR Elements, she joined our team and it's been wonderful. So we used to talk all the time about, your bench strength, your talent pipeline. It is still a very, very real thing for now, but also again, as part of your succession plan. So always talk to people to understand what they're doing. And again, that's everybody's responsibility to recruit, not just HR. So e-recruitment is what probably most of us think about. We're gonna post a job on Indeed and then we're gonna get all these awesome applicants and it's just like what the commercial says, right? Indeed, you need Indeed. But what Indeed's commercials don't tell us is that we're probably gonna have a lot of applicants that they haven't read the job description. They don't really know what they're applying for. They're just applying to jobs quickly using an apply now button. So we're gonna have a lot of junky applicants to sift through. That can be a big time waster, especially when, again, we think about our applicants and our applicants. A lot of the just easy applies are applicants who can't show up to an interview or who aren't truly interested in your position opportunity. It's convenient, but also this is a really important thing to take your budget for talent into consideration because that online posting can really cost a lot of money. So that's why I like to really focus on dedicated reaching out to applicants and potential candidates to talk about here's who we are, here's what we're looking for, and here's why we want to talk with you about potential opportunities. Benefit to e-recruitment. You can really share your opportunity with targeted groups. So this is great for diversity within your organization or looking for folks who maybe have special skills. So think about maybe somebody who's been a veteran, or if you need somebody who has knowledge of sign language or a different, speaking Spanish, being able to target different communities for applicants and potential employees, really, really great with e-recruitment. You're definitely gonna have a bigger pool, but it has to be a blended approach of both the marketing, the sourcing, and then some of those active candidates that are gonna come to you. So thinking about internal sourcing, and this is one of my favorite things, right? Because it means you were very strategic in your planning. You're hiring somebody now, but knowing that you're gonna potentially have different opportunities for them in years forward. And it really rewards your current employees for doing, a great job developing their skills, their organizational knowledge. And it really does capitalize on familiarity, right? If you're continuing to reinforce and communicate that employment value proposition, your employees are gonna wanna stay there. They know that you're focusing on their growth and development, and they have that values match to your business. It's absolutely gonna be really cost effective because you think about that initial cost to hire somebody, it's pretty high, but then we're gonna continue to get an ROI on every training, all of the benefits that we're offering, because we're not gonna have to spend thousands and thousands of dollars each time we have to hire a new person if we're able to continue to promote from within and build talent development as part of our ongoing succession plan. It's a huge morale booster. People love to know that their dedication and their hard work is going to be rewarded with future growth opportunities. And it really is going to talk about career pathing. A lot of times I think people believe that that's just something for a huge organization. I know Kellogg's used to have this really big career map where you could go in their corporate headquarters and pick out all these different crafted career paths. But it might be really easy to do within organizations of all sizes because you're really just talking about people's interests and their growth. It can be a homegrown career path and really be individual based on needs and interests. And again, every time you do internal sourcing, communicating about job opportunities to the team, you're probably going to get referrals. You're always going to be reinforcing that value proposition. So it's very good for marketing. So we're going to talk a little bit now about employee engagement. This is the repeat part. We want to be very repetitive in keeping our employees engaged and connected to the company. So engagement really does matter. It's not just a HR term for being nice to people and making them happy. It's not also even just about job satisfaction. It's a culmination of a couple things. So a couple of facts though that I like to always think about is, so when employees are engaged with your company, they truly do feel connection to the business. So that's why having that value proposition and brand that's accurate is so important, because employees truly do feel a personal connection to it. And that's where you see that passion come out at work. So engaged employees are going to be 24% more likely to help increase and drive sales results. It's because they're proud that they work for your organization. They want people to know what they do. They want people to understand what the organization is about. And they're going to be great advocates in the marketplace. And productivity for the organization at an individual level increases by about 20% for engaged employees. And that has a really great impact on the bottom line. So when we think about, oops, sorry guys, I can't see the monitor in the back. I didn't realize I was showing you a blank slide. I'm sorry. So the drivers for engaging employee engagement is one, having engaging leadership. Leadership needs to be available and aware of the team. So your executive director, they need to be present. They need to be connected, and they need to know who the employees are, what their roles are within the organization. And that really, really has a huge impact. Employees need interesting work. Sometimes jobs are not going to be super interesting. So this is where we talk about maybe special projects to just give them a little bit of variety, talking about what employees want for their next steps. How do they want their careers to change and grow? And the term is job enlargement. Sometimes as people really become those internal process experts for their role, adding different tasks and skills so that they can get a little bit more done. It is going to increase productivity and save some money as well. So providing clarity and agility. Again, this really goes back to that employment value proposition. What are they there for? Why does their position matter? How does it have an impact on the community? Why do they do what they do for you? And, feedback. We need to give employees feedback very, very frequently. That could be in the moment, but also it's in those more formal performance reviews as well as career discussions so that we are asking people what they want. Talking about benefits. It's not just something that you talk about right before open enrollment. We want to continue to talk about that over and over and over again. The rule of 11 times, right? We need to tell people something 11 times before they start to really understand and connect to it. And then finally, communication and clarity. So a communication strategy to employees as part of an ongoing pattern is really important. We want employees to expect certain types of meetings, certain types of newsletters, so that they look forward to it. They may be able to participate and contribute to those messages as well. These all positively impact engagement. So thinking about employee development, right? This is part of that internal sourcing, that succession planning. It includes career enrichment and growth. So making jobs bigger, giving people promotion opportunities, and knowing who's truly connected or just there, right? They're biding their time. So I love using an IDP, an individual development plan. We used to just do these for people who maybe they needed help, they weren't performing, but it's really different now. This is an organization's way of committing through the manager and providing training and resources to an individual based on what they want to do. That's also going to positively impact the organization, right? We might hire somebody now, but know that they want to grow and develop into some other type of different role within 5 years. Well, the organization needs that role. Let's cultivate that knowledge. Let's keep them sticky. Let's train them. And not only are they going to continue to be that brand ambassador, but they're going to know that they have a long-term career for us. This is also where tuition reimbursement or even state grants can come into place. Maybe you're not able to spend the time to train, or you don't have the knowledge internally to train. You can send an employee outside to get additional knowledge and development. I was talking at a board meeting last week about an employee who, he's in an entry-level position and he's really having a tough time with basic math. And the manager was feeling really frustrated, right? Basic math. I expected that this person could do it. It's causing me a lot of lost time, obviously lost productivity, and then, I keep having to nag this poor person to do better. So we were talking about the retraining grants that, hey, let's get a grant, let's apply, let's send this person back to get those skills. You're gonna show him that you care about him, that you want to help him, and he's gonna be very, very loyal because he knows you care and you're helping. And that also is gonna help the skills, decrease waste, help productivity, and this person is gonna have skills, hopefully, for other positions. And it also really, again, specialized training. Maybe it's different types of leadership academies, things to help just drive development across the organization. So I also just wanted to talk about kind of the overall impact, right, of development. We want to develop our leaders now in the future. It's part of the organizational strategy. We want our leaders to be growing and understand what we want now and in the future. We need to have performance metrics at all levels to understand if people are performing, but also that lets us know when we need to reward them and recognize. And it impacts in a positive way that organizational structure. So employee development is, again, just like recruitment, just like that budget and the target headcount, development is part of a very strategic long-term organizational strategy. Also going to talk about psychological safety, and this is probably something that people have started hearing about more and more. When I hear the term, it's not my favorite term, I'll just be honest. But I like the definition here of psychological safety, and I think it's something that we all probably had a time where we didn't feel this way at work, but the benefits of creating a psychologically safe environment are huge. So in a psychologically safe environment, your employees feel comfortable to ask questions, share their ideas and opinions, and be acknowledged appropriately where they're not fearful of making a mistake or having an idea that people maybe think is strange, right? They're not going to be disciplined for suggesting something. And really, when you have that baseline of psychological safety as part of your culture, employees are gonna take appropriate risks. They're gonna be generating new ideas and contributing to the business in ways that they wouldn't if they didn't feel free and safe to do that. But they're also gonna get things done on time. You're probably gonna see a lot more excellent performance because they're more confident appropriately within their work. Clear goals, people understand what they're supposed to do, they do it. That positively connects directly to having engaged employees. And really, they know that their work matters. It's that fifth one there, the impact. They know the impact that their work makes because they feel psychologically safe. So some other things that we're gonna see is innovation and creativity. I don't have the best ideas all the time. I don't think the same way as my team. And when we open it up and ask them, or even if they just have a great thought or idea, there's innovation that I never would have come up with on my own. People are learning, right, from their mistakes. It's okay to make a mistake as long as you learn from it. But it also really decreases wasted time. It improves performance at the organization. And again, these are now people who are ambassadors of that employment brand, that value proposition. Turnover is reduced, and you're going to see a lot more teamwork. People are sharing ideas. They're going to be helpful to one another. So psychological safety should be a huge piece of your culture, but also it's a huge driver of overall employee engagement. So thinking about continuous improvement, right? We've talked about a lot of things that maybe your organization needs to start or restart. So measuring improvement, that's appropriate. So we're gonna do another poll here. So thinking about an engagement survey, when was the last time that your organization did one of these? So in this calendar year, within the last 24 months, within the last 5 years, and what's an engagement survey? All right. So I think it's great news that the leader, right, is that people have done an engagement survey in the last year. You're focused on continuous improvement. You want to understand what your employees are saying the opportunity for change and growth is, and giving you feedback on potentially how you need to develop or enhance that employment value proposition. So we also see 2 other larger groups, did one within the last 2 years. That's great. And then also, what's an engagement survey? So an engagement survey is an employee survey where, and typically they should be done annually, at least every 18 months, right? That's that whole measuring portion of the employment value proposition, We need to make sure it's sticking. We need to make sure people understand and we're checking in to know what as leaders, what we need to do. So when you're thinking about this employee engagement survey, it can be pulse surveys, which are shorter. They're done probably every month, every other month, maybe 5 questions, just a couple, maybe a minute of time from employees providing feedback on a few questions. Or it can be more of a one-time larger engagement survey where you're polling your staff and asking them questions about, how do they work with their manager? How do they think and feel about your benefits, their pay, their work-life balance, their role, the work that they do? And it's a great way to check understanding and accuracy, really, of your employment value proposition. So a couple of things to think about when you're getting ready to launch an employee survey. And these are something that, a lot of times locally, it could be an organization that's running it for you and then you have to pay for the results. There are businesses that can come in and help create a custom engagement survey to really measure exactly what you're wanting to learn about within your organization. Or you can try making them yourself. Certainly pros and cons to all of those, right? A couple things to reflect on those. One, do we have a trust level where my employees are even gonna tell me how they feel, right? So if you don't have trust within the organization, probably not a good idea to do a survey yourself, because they're not gonna tell you the truth. Can you survey employees frequently enough to receive relevant feedback? It may need to start a little bit more often than once a year or every 18 months to really get that baseline, especially if you're developing something like your EVP. You want to know and ensure that it's sticking, that people understand it, that they're able to share it. Are you asking the right questions? And again, this goes back to, one person may not always have the best way to inquire of the team. You may need some outside opinions where you communicate what you want to measure. They can make some suggestions and even create questions for you. And is the survey easy for people, right? Not everybody is going to be able to sit at a computer and do it. Not everybody is going to want to use their phone. You may need to have different medias and methods for folks to be able to complete the survey. And they need to be fast. You need to provide results. You need to share the results with employees. Years and years ago, I led an engagement survey when I was leading HR for a private company. And the results weren't all A+, right? We do these in the spirit of continuous improvement. I wanted to be able to know what I should focus on. And our CEO was so displeased that we didn't get, straight A's, basically, that he wouldn't let us share results about things that we needed to improve. Well, that really kind of decimated any steps forward in culture, right? If I couldn't be open and honest with employees and thank them for their feedback, acknowledge that we heard them and that we know what they said and here's our plan to maybe improve or fix things, the next time around, they're not gonna tell me what they think. Probably won't even participate in the survey because it doesn't matter. It looks like a spy mission. So make sure that you're telling employees what the results were, what your plan is to correct them, and thanking them for their time and feedback. So then it's really important to measure the change. So the first time you do a survey, that's really going to be kind of your baseline, your benchmark. So it's important to do that survey again at an appropriate time period, but also you're going to have to ask a pretty similar battery of questions, otherwise you can't really measure a change. So it's important to keep the results, keep the questions, provide comparisons, have a goal for where you want to be so that it's your compass. You know where you need to go, where you want to go. I already talked about sharing the results. Also, make sure you share them timely. If it's been months and months, people are probably going to have forgotten that it even occurred. And we want to put the results in a place where employees and managers can access it. And again, drill down questions so that they're not so ambiguous that people don't know what to do. And sometimes the results may tell you that we have a little bit more homework or we want to dig in more. So this could be an area for short pulse surveys. Maybe it's just about benefits one week as you're really getting ready to prepare to do your enrollment. So that's actually perfect timings, and I'm ready to answer any questions that people have about the 3 areas that we talked about today.
I have a question. I see various job postings on LinkedIn, and it's hard to, I'm not actively looking, but you see them. And it seems to be the first thing that pops up in bold letters is this job is 100% in person, no remote, don't even ask, it's not an option. So what are your thoughts and we were in a situation where everyone was working remote, got very comfortable, and a fair number of people don't want to go back to in person.
Oh, yeah.
So how do you handle that from a recruitment standpoint?
Well, that's a great question. And I think that, COVID really did change the way all of us work. And gosh, if you don't have to get up and drive somewhere in the morning, or you don't have to pay for daycare, that really can be a big life changer. But what I'm seeing a lot of is, one, fully remote, there is a loss of collaboration. There is a loss of stickiness to that value prop and the culture overall. What I'm seeing is really a blend of hybrid work schedules. Certain days where or even certain times, right, that employees must be on site in the office so that they can have effective meetings, that they can have collaboration within the team and just, be with one another to keep that culture going. But what I do like about what you're saying on the internet is so many people might just be looking for remote only. We don't want, this is all in person, so don't waste my time, right, with an in-person only.
And I would just think with nonprofits don't have the biggest budgets, so trying to be creative with the remote and being flexible with employee needs so you don't lose some good people.
Being flexible, being reasonable, being flexible. Sometimes it's that whole 8 to 5, right? Why is it that those are our work hours? I talked about a board meeting I was in. Another thing that we had talked about was, gosh, people are having such a hard time with attendance. But then as the manager, I don't want to keep writing them up and disciplining them because I can't terminate them because I can't replace them. So what do? Well, why do they have to be there at 7:30? It's not a production line, right? What are those core hours that you need your staff there? And so being flexible where you can to, again, drive collaboration, having set times for meetings and discussions so that you can have a little bit more work-life balance where people are feeling more fulfilled to meet their requirements is definitely an area where people can be creative. Yes?
I guess what suggestions could you give like an HR department in improving the recruiting function? So I'll say that anecdotally, when we outsource our recruiting to headhunters, we get much better candidates than internally. So what can an in-house HR function learn from a company like yourself in recruiting
Certainly.
to better that? Because we end up always paying headhunter fees because
It's expensive, right?
Yep.
So internally, a couple of suggestions. One is really have an efficient and effective process. So making sure that you're targeting the right things in the market. That's where that value proposition really comes into play. You're communicating about why people should work at your organization, getting them sticky, getting them interested. But the biggest thing that I'm seeing, so with a recruiter, right? They're in touch with the candidate, they're helping walk them through the process and taking away some of that initial screening that an in-house HR team is having to do. So the process is a lot faster. But getting managers to be easily able to schedule those interviews, making sure that you're taking advantage of having a succinct process. If you have a candidate that's gonna need to meet with 3 or 4 people, make it happen back to back all at one time. Which typically, if you're paying an outside recruiter to do that, you're gonna make it as quick as possible because you don't wanna pay more fees than you have to. The other thing that sometimes can make recruiting for an internal organization difficult is if they don't have the right technology, right? Having an appropriately programmed applicant tracking system is super important because we're able to share information with the hiring managers a lot faster, like what you would see with an external recruiter who, my guess is going direct to the manager, not working through the internal HR team.
Yeah.
So we need to help make sure the internal recruiters have the technology so that they can be agile as well. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
I would just like to add
Yeah.
one comment to that. You said the internal HR team, assuming that they are not strictly recruiters, they're general HR generalists?
We had an internal recruiting
You
team.
do, okay.
Yeah.
Because usually if you're asking an HR department person to do recruiting, it's a different skill set. And most HR people don't want to do recruiting.
Like it.
It's more of a sales hunting.
Yeah, I feel like our internal recruiting team would just put on LinkedIn, we're hiring, and that was like it. So and then you're paying $10,000, $20,000 finder's fees for every person. So it's kind of like, what could they do differently? And obviously, recruiting firms like yourself have a benefit of a network of people that almost like funnel to an extent. But that's where it's. I'd be curious what internally you can improve on, because you get the funnel of resumes that are just like, this doesn't even work.
Right.
It's more.
There's also tools that can be utilized online, like little assessments, questionnaires that can help clean out that profile of online applicants. And, honestly, you made a comment that I tend to think of as a little bit of a con when using if you go to a specialty recruiter that just recruits in one space, they have this list, I always call it the list of names, where internally the talent team should really be looking for, of course, skills, industry experience, but that fit. So I'll see candidates that may cycle through a little bit faster if they come from the list of names, not a targeted, specialized search, where you're starting by, of course, looking at what is the culture, who do we want to hire, because then they're gonna fit in a lot better with their colleagues. Yes.
What's the best practice turnaround time for a comprehensive background check?
Oh, that's a very specific question. So,
Very specific problem.
all right. So this is a special leftover from COVID. It should be done by now. And when you say comprehensive background check, is that just criminal, or are you doing education and past employment?
Kind of everything,
So they're included in it, is my
yeah.
question. Those are the two things that are taking a little bit more time, because education and a lot of employment checks are going through clearinghouses where you're also paying additional fees. Important to do them, but for certain jobs, right? I would recommend that you really look at what your background check is to determine, okay, how important is it for us to absolutely validate that this past employment happened, that this education happened? Sometimes the answer is going to be, it is critical. The criminal pieces of the background check, some of them can be turned around in less than 24 hours. Others may take a few days, because there are certain districts that are still requiring a physical court runner to go in when the court is open to look through files. And so when we were, kind of in lockdown, it was taking weeks and weeks and weeks. So right now, I think you should expect a comprehensive check to be able to come back within 5 days.
Okay.
Weekends take longer.
Okay.
Is
Thanks.
that what you're seeing?
No,
They need to look at who's doing those for you.
maybe.
Great questions. Any in the chat? Nope. All right. Thank you so much.
We will be having a 15-minute break. So come back at 10:30. Thank you, everyone.
Jason, I just noticed you and I didn't get any applause.
We're saving it for the end. Well, they must be getting something delivered, and she gonna be looking, said,
Back.
oh, they're taking a pipe that
Alright.
she's moving.
Back, everybody. We've got to settle down the crowd here in Louisville.
He was, he got a, she took it.
Great, okay. Let's get started again. We have a great opportunity today to do a case study on some board, a revamping of a board structure in order to better meet the needs of a nonprofit organization. So I've got David Calzi here with me today. I think we have a poll first though. So everybody make sure you get your polling infrastructure back in place so that we can make sure you get that CPE. And I'm gonna move on. Oh, we've got some objectives. You'll all receive this handout too of what we're gonna be taking a look at here in the case study. But here's our polling then. So which of the following statements are not true? A little hard to read over there. Julia? Do you have the answer?
Oh.
I wrote the question so well that I'm,
Yes, give me 1 second. Keep answering.
Surely it's.
I'm pretty sure I know what the answer is, but.
I haven't volunteered to look at this.
I think we have a pretty smart crowd, so, but I know that I had noted what the actual was, and it's a fairly good amount of donors that are also volunteers, but it'd be nice to be able to share that information.
So see,
It is.
it's like 20.
You're all waiting with breath.
The best laid plans. Maybe we can revisit that after we move on to our discussion and leave everybody hanging so that they stay with us.
It's B.
It's B. Are you sure?
It is the one highlighted in your email. Yes.
Okay. Well, maybe when we provide some follow-up information, we can provide a little bit more follow-up information on that. All right, let's move on. Actually, I'm gonna hold off on that, I think. I wanted to do just a little introduction on Dave, who's with us today, works for St. Vincent de Paul. And I wanted to just step back and talk about St. Vincent de Paul, who was with us about 425 years ago. He started work, really doing a lot of great work for those neighbors in need, those people in distress, and particularly people in poverty. And since his lifetime, there have been communities across the world, but particularly in the United States, that continue to carry on that mission. And I'm sure you're familiar with the St. Vincent de Paul organizations. The St. Vincent de Paul organization in Louisville is one of the longest serving social charities in Louisville. And it is also the #1 referral to all calls in the Metro 211. So it really is an active organization, and it provides a great need in this community to those that are in temporary distress or are suffering from chronic poverty. And Dave, I'd like to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself and your role at that organization, and particularly, what your journey's been as a board member and the path that took you to being an executive director of such a great organization in this community.
Yeah, so no, thank you, Kaydee, for that, and it's a long journey, as some folks in here know who I worked with back in the eighties and nineties. I actually started off in public accounting with Arthur Anderson in 1983 and spent 18 years with them. Actually made partner the year Anderson went away. Great timing. September of 2001. And, you know, just learned all kinds of things about reputation. You talked about the risk of reputation, especially with organizations that don't necessarily, that's all they have is the reputation. They don't necessarily have hard assets. But what was fortunate, though, working with the partners that I had at Anderson at the time, to actually sell the practice to EY. It was one of the very few office deals that was done in the United States. There was a lot of that done overseas, and spent 19 years at Ernst & Young, 15 of those years as managing partner. Mandatory retirement, again, great timing, smack dab in the middle of the pandemic. So I was kind of like, okay, you're retired, you're sitting there, you can't even go anywhere. And so really kind of quickly after that, I never really had any designs on this, but went to work with the then president of the University of Louisville, Dr. Bendaputi, to start up their office of industry partnerships, which really was not any different than what we were doing in public accounting, was aligning value with what people needed, and the universities historically have been really not good at that in terms of just getting outside of the campus, connecting with the businesses that they work with, and spent a lot of time there. And actually thought I was going to spend a lot of time with the business school, but I spent more time with the Speed School of Engineering because of all just the commercial applicability of the research and the things that they had to offer different businesses in town. That was the one that we spent the most time with. And got a phone call one night, and it was from the board, one of the board members at St. Vincent de Paul saying, hey, we're looking for a CEO. Would you be interested in coming over here? And okay. And you know, long story short is I ended up starting with St. Vincent de Paul in January of 2022. Yeah, so it's going on 2 years. I had no clue, and this is interesting because I'd love to get a sense of the folks that are here. You mentioned that folks know what we do, but the reality is they don't. You know the name, St. Vincent de Paul, most people do, especially those that are lifelong Catholics will clearly know the whole notion of the tie back into Catholic social justice, starting with St. Vincent and then in the 1830s in Paris, France. But you may not know all the things that we do. And today we'll try to help dispel some of that. But you know, when I joined, I really joined and took the position without really doing diligence, which is contrary to kind of how I was brought up for those 37 years. And it's not necessary. I'm not saying this because it's a bad thing. I'm just saying I did it because I felt at that time, from a purpose perspective, it was aligned with what my purpose was. And sometimes when you got a 30 or 40 year career and you retire, and maybe your purpose was what you were doing for 40 years, and that's done, that can be a problem. Right? And so it wasn't so much that I left U of L as I knew that this was a place that I wanted to be. And you know, through that career, you know, Jim knows this, and Mike Spurlock over here, my CFO, was a fellow that we all worked together at Anderson, and you know, they'll know and clearly see the breadth of the organization that St. Vincent de Paul is. You know, I worked on multi-billion-dollar organizations that had global reach, billions of dollars of, you know, revenues. Our budget's $8 million, but it's the most complex place and organization I've ever been. We're going to talk about board governance, and that's part of the complexity. It is really the hardest thing I've ever done in terms of just all the bits and pieces that we have. It's a conglomerate of different services. 170 years in Louisville, a long time, and we're housing, feeding, and supporting those that are in need with compassion and dignity. Any given night, we're in Shelby Park, so if you've ever been to Logan Street Market, it's not too far from there, just a couple couple streets over, right near Mazik, Middle, in Shelby Park, kind of butts up next to Smoketown. And any given night, there's 300 folks living there. It's their home. Some in emergency shelter, some in transitional housing, fleeing domestic abuse. We have a transitional housing program for veterans, 20 veterans that are in transitional housing. We're going to announce here in a couple of weeks, 24 more units for permanent housing for veterans, which is really exciting. One in 10 folks that are unhoused are veterans. And of those, 90% are honorably discharged, right? And so, you know, these are individuals, men and women that served our country that for whatever reason are finding themselves on the street. And the main reason is there's not enough housing that's affordable. We have a commercial kitchen operation that serves 11,000 meals a month. Lunch and dinner pantry serving 500 families a month, after school programming, and permanent housing as well on campus, and another 150 folks that we serve in permanent housing off campus in facilities we don't own, but then we're doing the case management. So I didn't grow up in the housing side of the business, and so, you know, it's been a nice compliment with the folks that are there that are experts in that. And we talked about the internal hiring and the importance of that and having folks that are experts in these things. But I have to tell you, we're doing God's work every day. We're saving people's lives. There's no doubt about that. And that certainly is a great reward. But it's tough out there. And it's a sign of Louisville, and I'll finish here. I told you got to rein me in. I'll be the first to admit, and it's not a criticism, but, you know, we have this beautiful space here. I spent 37 years in beautiful spaces just like this, going to clients, and I was on lots of boards. The chair of some of the boards, I mean, just about any board in town, I think I was on it over those 37 years. But I never saw this level of need. Just never saw it. I mean, it is significant. And it's been exacerbated by the pandemic, the insidiousness of inflation, all those things that, yeah, we go to put gas in your car, and it's a pain in the butt to pay more, right? But there's folks that are making decisions as to whether or not they eat or get their medicine, and so it's an inconvenience for many of us, but for others, it's life-changing. And so I encourage folks to come and visit us, because if I asked you to say, well, are you familiar with St. Vincent de Paul? Have you donated? Have you volunteered? Lots of folks will say, yeah, I'm familiar with that. But if I ask the question, have you visited our campus and have you taken a tour, really see all the different things that we're doing? Most folks will not have had that opportunity.
Right.
So this is an open invitation to reach out to me and come on down, see what we're doing. I guarantee you'd be amazed. You're going to see great work.
For those that are participating in our other offices and remotely, there are organizations, there are nonprofits like this in every community that do important work. And Dave, I think, you know, that just dovetails with what we were just hearing about. The complexity of nonprofit work is really challenging. It's really rewarding. I mean, your passion shines through. You've done a lot of great things in your career, but I would say when you are fully done, you will look back and feel the best about this work that you're doing now.
Yeah. Thank you.
So employees within nonprofits do fantastic things and really move the organization forward, but it starts with the board. And the reason we wanted to bring Dave here today, when he stepped into St. Vincent de Paul, he pretty quickly recognized that there were some things that could help that organization drive their mission forward faster. So I'd like you to give us, you know, kick us off into this case study here a little bit by just telling us what changed about your leadership structure and your board.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And we've done a lot of things that we've changed over the last 20 months. It almost feels like it's too much, that we've bitten off more than we can chew, and Jim can attest to that with the amount of time that he spends with us. But the board was one of those areas that early on, especially with the board experience that I had, I saw a lot of different boards, saw a lot of different bylaws, saw a lot of different ways that boards were structured. And I know we're going to talk about the pillars of governance, and that was really, it's great. And it's really something that I'm looking forward to talking about. Because our board operated in a certain path. Historically, the CEO has had, very strong control over the decisions, strong control over the things that were being done, and would bring to the board those decisions after they were made. And you'll see later the pillars, there's a fiduciary pillar where mainly this board is operated on the fiduciary side of things. It's not a bad thing. It just is what it is. Most of the boards that I've been on have been that. And Jim, in your talk, you talked about all those risks. That's the kind of stuff that boards have oversight over. They have oversight over all those things. That's that fiduciary side, as opposed to the more strategic side or the side of really being involved in making decisions. One of the things though that really kind of hit me though, early on, and I know that sometimes when you start new, you should take your time and go slow, but this was one of those that really struck me. And it's not always the right answer, but for us it is that we didn't have term limits. And so we had wonderful board members. I mean, just absolutely wonderful, passionate board members, but they've been there forever. And what we didn't take advantage of was the ability to create board members that become alumni. And oftentimes what you'll find with those that have been on the board before and are now alumni, they actually spend more time with you. Because they don't have to go to meetings. They don't have to go to meetings. They don't have to, but they know the organization. You can always call on them. They're always going to be there for you. And they're happy actually to be off the board because they can do other stuff. So we immediately instituted term limits. And what that meant was that it was 3 years, we switched it to 3 years, initial term, with the option to do another 3 years. And then after that second 3-year term, 1 year off, but you could come back after 1 year off. The challenge that I had was the board members that were there. What do I do with the board members that are there that have been serving for 10 years, 15 years? And of course, we had to have a conversation with each of them because we're now limiting their terms. But what we decided to do is I shifted the annual meeting to January from September so that everybody comes on and goes off at the same date. Because we were having folks coming on with all these staggered terms and I couldn't figure out what people's terms were.
You're doing orientation
24/7. Yeah, right. And so we said we're going to do it January 1st of every year. And what we said to the existing board members is, if you want, you can sit for another 3-year term starting January 1 of 2023. And they all accepted, except for maybe 3 or 4 that said they go off. But all of them stayed on committees as advisory committee members on the different committees that we have. And with that then, we knew that we were going to have folks going off in 3 years that were on the existing board. They were all very happy with that. And we added 9 new board members last January, which is a lot of board members to add, right?
Were you looking for a specific type of attribute?
Yeah, we were. Well, again, this is a topic that all boards have to grapple with, is that, from a diversity perspective, the board was not very diverse. It's an organization that does have a hierarchical organization as well, St. Vincent de Paul Society across the country, and then just like any person-made kind of thing, it has a hierarchy. And so a lot of the folks naturally, it is what it is, looked like me, old white guys, and which is not bad. I'm an old white guy, but lots of our grants are asking demographic questions. The granting organizations, certainly the federal government, the city and state governments, and many of the large corporate foundations are asking questions about the makeup of your staff, the makeup of your board, and it's a different day, and also from that perspective, I know for a fact, and I knew this at EY in our journey with diversity, is that we do better. And we are better as an organization when we embrace that. And I'm not just talking about race, I'm talking about gender, I'm talking about diversity of thought, experience, but also what we didn't have on the board was any lived experience. Nobody that had ever had experience with eviction, homelessness. And so we worked on that, so that was also a focus to find somebody that had that experience, because I've never been homeless. I wouldn't know what it's like to be homeless, right? And so having somebody that has faced that was really important to us. And we're
Have you
continuing.
written that into your bylaws now?
It's not written into the bylaws. It's not actually written specifically into the bylaws, but it's certainly written into our annual plans, and strategic plan, to be able to work on that. The other side of it is with us serving, now we'll be serving 44 veterans, is to have a veteran on the board, specifically that had experienced homelessness, to be on the board. And it's not easy. I'm not suggesting that it's easy to do this, but we made significant changes on the board. It looks very different than what it looked like before. And it's an ongoing process.
What is the plan to keep that continuous improvement? Do you have
We've got a
is
governance
it part of
committee.
your agendas
Yeah.
or?
Yeah, it is. And I mean, we've got a governance committee that again, our strategic plan is a 5-year plan, but we have annual plans within that strat plan. And it's a very specific initiative for us this year that by January 1st of this year, we're gonna have 2 or 3 more candidates identified and bring them on board. So it's one of those things where you can talk about it. It's nice to talk about it, but you just gotta do it.
Do you have a nominations committee or a
That's the governance-
subset?
The governance committee serves as the nomination.
What does that process
And
look
the other
like?
thing is I want to say this about brand. We talked about this in many of the and Jamie and yours, and Jim and yours as well. The brand reputation isn't just there to be of interest to employees, but to board members that want to join your board. And reputation matters. What am I joining, right? And out of the 9 folks that we asked, all 9 accepted. And I'll tell you, the secret weapon was to bring them onto campus with the staff, let the staff talk about what we do, and we took them on a tour. Slam dunk. Yes, I want to be a part of this kind of thing. Now I'm going to keep them. But,
So what type of commitment do you ask for from your board members? Is there a monetary,
There is.
time commitment, those
There-
types of things?
Yeah, serve on one committee, of course, show up, those kinds of things. There is a monetary commitment, but we're very, again, if we're gonna ask folks with lived experience,
Right.
we have to be flexible with that because there's different gifts that folks have from a treasure standpoint.
Right,
But, we set a pretty low
you can
number.
define that in different ways.
You can. I think the bigger thing for me is that, everybody has folks that they know. And so today I have 24 board members. If all 24 bring 1 or 2 people to the table that we can talk to about what we're doing, everybody can do that. They may not necessarily have to make an ask. We'll make the ask, but just open up your friends list of folks that we need to get to know.
Right, just that passion. If you're passionate about
Yeah.
being a board member and you share your passion,
Right.
that will help.
Yeah,
It's
well,
like
and
the
it helps for
wheels.
board members to do it. I mean, I'm supposed to be that way, right? In my role. But when you have board members doing it as well, it makes it a lot easier. So it's more of that shared responsibility.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. In this role of retooling the board and the way that committee structures worked and that type of thing, what was the difference between your role and the role of the chair or other board members? How do you draw that line between your operational role and their oversight role?
Well, that's evolving. I will say that this was something that kind of played a heavy role in some of these changes, and really just said, look, we need to get term limits. Unless you disagree with it, remove it, right? So it was more of bringing an idea that, quite frankly, if they would have said no, that would have been a whole nother conversation, but they didn't.
Right.
So in my role as CEO, I played a pretty heavy role on that. And not just that, but we also, from a programmatic perspective, housing, we're housing folks, and we have case management, so we have housing and advocacy on the case management and social worker side. All of those organizations historically have been separate. And so just like anything, even in a small organization, if you have kind of created silos, folks will kind of work in those silos. And again, it's not a good thing, it's not a bad thing, but it made sense to put it all together. And so we changed the structure, not just of the board, other organizations as well from the standpoint of how we serve and do what we do.
That's a great segue because the next slide is your mission. How do you feel that these changes really help to advance your mission?
Well, the example of the housing was, it's really hard to be unhoused. It's a full-time job. I mean, if you can imagine, just being on the street, where do you go? What do you do, right? So we shouldn't make it harder for folks to be able to navigate and work with our organization. And again, it's not a criticism, it's just how we evolved. And so by putting that together, we now have one person that's over both the advocacy side as well as the housing side. Because on the housing side, a lot of the folks that are living on campus have leases. And so sometimes eviction is necessary just for the safety of the rest of the folks that live there, safety of them and safety of our staff. And that's just a reality. But having that together and making sure that grievance process and all that works together with the advocacy side as well as the compliance side has made a big difference. Really big difference. We made other structural changes as well, and the board approved these things. One is, and this is a nuance that can be lost on folks, but in the emergency shelter world, the basic standard operating procedure is for those in the emergency shelter to leave in the morning and come back at night. So again, all right, if this morning you had to leave your home and take all your stuff with you and walk here, and then, maybe you had a doctor's appointment at 3 o'clock or this or that, and then you couldn't go back home until 4 o'clock, right? You had to just go away, right? And so it creates a barrier for folks ultimately to get to permanent housing. We changed that and went to no check-in, no check-out. And the rate of success to permanent housing doubled within less than 6 months. And the reason is you have a place to be. Maybe you do need to get to a doctor's appointment. What if you work third shift? We have 5 men now in our shelter that are working third shift. They didn't have any place to go during the day, right? So they have that now. They don't have to take their stuff with them. They can keep their stuff there. They have more access to counseling on the advocacy side. And it's those kinds of tweaks and shifts that aren't easy to do, but we did it. And with the board's help
I would
to
think
do
that,
that.
that's a key performance indicator that you just cited. Your rate of permanent housing, your turnover rate.
Yep.
Were there changes through this process in what those KPIs were that the board was keeping an eye on? What I see happen in boards a lot is over time somebody asked for a stat and you keep giving them the same stat over and over and nobody really knows what they're doing with it after a while. Was that part of your process to do a refresh?
Yeah, it was. And again, that's, it's easy to talk about it, but it was really difficult to make that change.
Sure.
And we didn't know what the results were going to be. We really did. We went into it not exactly knowing. And it's interesting, the length of stay increased. So the length of time that folks spend in the emergency shelter went up. And you might say that, well, that's not a good thing. Well, yeah, it was, because ultimately the success rate went up. And so you have that turnover to success. But our program side and housing side are constantly providing that kind of data to the board. But we're still in that place of, it's more of an oversight.
Right.
More of an oversight, more of a fiduciary role, as opposed to
Strategic and generative.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's important though for the board to be involved in that identification of what should we measure that matters, that will really give credence to that mission and move it.
I mean, ultimately, it's transitioning to permanent housing, and I want to say this, and this is something that I've been on a bit of a conversion myself over the last 20 months, is that, when you drive down the street and you see somebody in those circumstances, it's natural to think, thoughts that maybe aren't great thoughts, right? It's just natural. Everyone has an opinion or a position on those that find themselves unhoused. And there's a significant myth as well that says, well, it's because they did something wrong, or they're drug addicts, or, you know, they're alcoholics, or, you know, whatever. And the reality is, and I don't know about you guys, and I'm not gonna get into this, but I know in my own family, in my own extended family, I've got all that. Folks suffering mental illness, folks that have addiction problems, folks that just are kind of down on their luck. But I know in my family, there's a safety net. You know, there's that help. We haven't given up on those individuals. There's a lot of people out there that they just don't have that. And so they're not unhoused because of those things. They're unhoused because there's not enough housing. And you're gonna hear all the time about affordable housing, affordable housing. And the reality is there is not enough affordable housing, but that's what we're doing on campus. You know, we're providing housing to folks that they may never be able to pay market rate. And I don't know the last time you all checked rents lately, but it's tough, even for folks that have, you know, a job. You know, my daughter's a school teacher.
It's one of the number one needs across the country is
you know,
housing.
and so just as you think through this, as you go away from here, just keep in mind what I'm saying here about the notion of why people, as opposed to judging, it's kind of like, well, what happened to you, right? And it is that notion of the lack of housing that is affordable for all members of our community. That is really the source of the problem.
Well, I think what I'm straying now, see, you're pulling me into it.
Sorry, I thought you were.
But I think what we're seeing more and more of is it's not just a poverty issue, but it's a working poor issue as well. So, St. Vincent de Paul is pretty, so I've got the life cycle up now, we can't see it, but St. Vincent de Paul, 170 years you said, Dave?
Yeah, a long time.
So they're pretty mature in their life cycle. How do you feel that set them up for this change? Did you feel that was in some ways a barrier, or how did it contribute or inhibit the ability to really flex with the times?
You know, it's, Kaydee, it's actually preparing for this today got me really thinking about, I never really thought about this whole notion of the board being focused really more on a fiduciary side of things as opposed to the other side. We're constantly looking at our programmatic side of what we do. We've been doing it for a long time. I mean, the mission will never change. House, feed, support those in need with compassion and dignity. That's never going to change. What will change, though, is what we do and how we do it. The example of the 24/7 no check-in, check-out, right? That was a big shift. It wasn't still aligned with the mission.
Right.
And actually help
Better serve
the mission, right? Those kinds of changes. But we have so many things in front of us right now in terms of what works and what doesn't work. We have I mentioned that we are going to be announcing the 24 units for veterans. It's a facility on campus. It's under renovation right now. Historically, for the last 3 years, it was part of a youth development program, a grant that the Home of the Innocents had. It was their grant. We were a subrecipient providing transitional housing for 18 to 24-year-olds. It became very clear based on the statistics, the outcomes, that was a particular facility that 18 to 24-year-olds didn't necessarily want to go into. So when they found themselves maybe coming out of foster care, they'd work with the Home of the Innocents, and they had a choice. We're going to rapidly rehouse you, no transitional housing. Or you can go into transitional housing and then you'll get housed later. Well, they were voting for the rapid rehousing. I mean, what we have there is kind of a dorm kind of facility with cameras. And, you know, when I was 18, I'm glad my parents didn't have cameras in the house. You know. You know, so the vacancy rates are really high. I mean, we were very successful in the work that we did for the kids that went through there. But sometimes you have to step back and look at these, and with the board's help, is to look at the statistics and the data and realize that the resources will still be there. The Home of the Innocent still has those resources. They just need to be deployed in a different way.
Exactly.
And so for us, it's clear from working with veterans is that they really appreciate the community and the communal aspect of being together. And so we're hoping that, we've already got 4 applications that we're not even open yet for that unit for veterans that are in our transitional housing. But the importance of, and again, I'm grateful of this time because the importance of involving our board in those decisions ahead of time. Like we were talking earlier, we've got a bunch of low income tax credit properties. And you all, I gotta tell you, if there's organizations out there that are looking at that stuff, really look at it and look at what the compliance requirements are for those things. It's 30 years of compliance. We've already issued the tax credits. The folks that invested have gotten them. We still have another 15 years to comply. And let me just real quick on that note, for instance, in the building that we're gonna house the veterans, it's a tax credit property. Do you know that each one of those units is considered a separate building? And so we have to put folks in units that have been vacant the longest, as opposed to the units that we've got renovated and are ready. You can't put somebody in it. You gotta put them in one that's not done yet. That's because it's been vacant for 90 more days than that one. Now, tell me how crazy that is when you're sitting there faced with somebody that wants to get off the street and you gotta follow some dang tax credit. So you just have to, the compliant, Jim, you talked about the compliance. I would add to that list the regulatory compliance of grants. In addition to the income tax, IRS, tax exempt, because if you don't have the folks that are there that can comply and keep you out of trouble, the expense to it is it's a looming expense.
Yeah, and I know there is a lot of, there's a lot of action happening right now towards grant reform at the federal level, which I'm sure will trickle down to state levels. But I think it speaks to the necessity, especially in this age where we don't necessarily have the longevity of employment that we once did, that institutional history isn't lost. And that those considerations are given to all your decisions. In your example, the renovations really should be targeted at those units that have been vacant the longest because they're gonna have to be filled first.
Yeah, right.
So it's coordinating a lot of different complexities of your organization.
Especially when there's people living in the units. Or being moved in. I mean, so it's complex. There's a lot of human dynamics in this, not just the construction dynamics and all that. There's human dynamics.
So as the board looks at those things, I think it's important for them to find ways to support the team, the staff.
It is.
That really make sure that you have the technology to be able to track those compliance issues in a way that's as efficient as possible. And those things all cost money, and sometimes that causes people to pause, but being able to explain how in the long run it really will advance your mission is essential.
It will, and when we talk about the tax credit properties, I mean, that's something that, again, I got Mike Spurlock, our CFO here, we're really.
We don't have another chair.
We don't have another chair, but I just point them out because I'm so grateful for them. When we were looking for a CFO, I called him to see if he knew anybody. He goes, "What about me?" And okay, it's great. Another purpose-driven decision.
It was more like a late-night text drunk dial. But I respond to those too,
Sorry, I brought him into this conversation. So, but that's something that we have to look at. It's 5 years from now. We've got mortgages on those properties coming due, and banks like to have their mortgages paid. And so, those are things that we need to involve the board in, because the decisions that we make on that could have an impact, not on the mission, but on how we do what we do, kind of thing, within that mission.
Right.
It could shift what we do in those properties.
Correct. And being able to, that's what's supporting your mission. That's the structure that holds it up. I think we have a poll. Let's see, maybe we don't.
the next one.
That is not, okay, there we go. Oh, maybe they're related. Someone take a look at that slide. I should have brought some handouts. Okay, so this comes up fairly frequently, the issue of lobbying and advocacy and political involvement of 501c3 nonprofits. We were just talking about government grants and the impact they have on nonprofits. And 501c3s are subject to these three areas of operations, distinguishing lobbying from your political activity. So I'm gonna have you take a look at that quickly, and then we will go to the poll question. I'm gonna let you read those. Okay. So of those then, political activity is attempting to influence the implementation of, is that true or false? Political activity is something that 501c3s are not allowed to do. There is a limit in the amount of lobbying a 501c3 can do, and they are, especially national organizations now, are pushing for 501c3s to do more advocacy. They are fully allowed to do advocacy for their mission-based purposes. But understanding the distinction between those three areas of operations is really essential for a board, because they set the tone and they play an incredibly important role in advocacy. And we don't want them to shy away from advocacy. You need them to be your most prominent cheerleaders in your community. But we do want to make sure that nothing they do puts the 501c3 at risk.
Well, Metro government, last November, instituted new rules on ethics for lobbying with anyone within the mayor's office, as well as Metro Council, which is really interesting, because I work very hard to make sure that we stay on the advocacy side of things. Not a lobbyist. I don't want to have to register as a lobbyist. We're not, but we're out there continually bringing people on campus, including Metro Council members, to understand what we're doing.
Education.
And education, and to me, that's advocacy. Every year you go before Metro Council, and it's called a begathon. You go and you say how great we are and all that, and you hope that you get some money. And the city has provided some important funding to us. I mean, the funding to go 24/7 came from the city, and we couldn't do it without it. And so it's very important to us, but the role that I play is, and I tell our folks on our boards, it's advocacy, and we try to keep it that way. But there are not-for-profits. It's something that a lot of folks don't know exists, but there is a new ethics rules for not-for-profits. And it was interesting, in that rule, they carved out U of L.
And I think that's an important point, that different municipalities in different states do have different rules about registering for lobbying and being compliant on those related issues, depending on where your nonprofit is incorporated or registered. Okay. Tell us about how your board measured success before you were there, maybe? And some of this restructuring occurred, and how they measure it now.
It's hard for me to speak about before. Right now, it really comes down to some pretty basic things. I mean, our focus is on getting folks into permanent housing. And so we talked earlier about reducing non-programmatic expenses. And, clearly that's important. We've done a pretty decent job with that. It is tied into that success, okay? And nothing else, really. And not returning to homelessness, right? The other side, in terms of, for us is, I gotta tell you, ignorance would be really bliss for me. But being somebody that have been trained in understanding balance sheets and cash flow and all that kind of stuff, any not-for-profit you're gonna look at, your head's gonna explode. And you look at it, you say, every year, we make the ends meet. Every year, you get to where you need to get. But all the stuff that has to happen to be able to get there, I mean, you all, and Jamie, we were talking earlier about onboarding folks. Our turnover rate, I don't even want to say what it was. 59.7%.
It's expensive.
When you're getting paid less than $15 an hour to deal with the things that our program aides have to deal with. And if you have a choice, you may or may not make it. They may be mission oriented. They may want to be there. It is hard work. And the community needs to understand that these folks are doing really important things in our community, right? So we're working really hard to move that needle. And we're in a whole different world. Certainly a different world than the one I lived in for 37 years. And it's hard out there. And it's hard to make those ends meet. And so the board certainly looks at us from the parameters of what are we doing to get that public support? Because when you get grants from the federal government, again, careful what you're doing, right? Because a lot of the grants that we got 10, 15 years ago don't keep up with inflation. We were hiring case managers at some, whatever level it was in 2010. It's now 2023. Those grants have not kept up with that.
Right.
And where does it come from? So it'd be a great study to show, okay, here's your support from the government grants over time. And what you're going to see is they're going to stay flat. And the cost of actually doing what you do is going to go up. And it's going to have to come from somewhere. And it comes from the generosity of the folks in the public. But, if folks don't know what you do, it's hard to do that. Now, we've been the beneficiary of 170 years in this community, 170 years, and it's a very strong Catholic community. We're not religiously affiliated. We don't even get any money from the archdiocese. We do get volunteers, and we do have that community that contribute, right? But we also have many that are not, more on the secular side, maybe not Catholic, that want folks that are unhoused and that are in food deserts to be served. And so we're able to kind of go out into both of those, but that is an area that we're constantly looking at and trying to do what we need to do to be able to create sustainable operations, right? I've been asked by many to say, well, why don't you just add more beds? Just add more beds. And the answer would, that'd be great. We'd love to do that, right? Because we know that they're needed. But just to give you a sense, in our emergency shelter, there's 50 men in our emergency shelter every night. That operation that's now 24/7 costs $1 million a year to operate that. And so you got to be really careful in terms of what you commit yourself to, because if you commit yourself to something and then aren't successful in it, you hurt people, right? Not just the folks that you're serving, but your employees. Right? So that making those ends meet is probably the thing that keeps me up most at night, is just how are we going to do this? How are we going to make it work? Every year it seems to work, but it's just, shouldn't be an every year struggle, especially for something this
You're
important.
not alone.
I know I'm not. No, I'm not.
Before we run out of time, I do want to touch on, we've talked about it a little bit, these pillars of governance. The three real roles of a board are oversight, the fiduciary responsibilities for financial and compliance outcomes, the strategic, which is really looking forward, and then, I have the right thing in here?
Fiduciary, yeah.
Everybody's looking at me like, I think that's the, yeah, and the generative, which is really, are we asking the right questions? What are the opportunities? Strategic is really how do we get there, but then generative is really thinking about, are we asking the right questions? Are we really causing our mission to go forward? Just talk about how that was considered and how you feel like that's working at St. Vincent de Paul.
And again, I'm thankful for being asked to be here because it's getting me to think about our board and most of the boards that I've been on is more on the right side of this. And that's the side, if you're on that side, again, all the risks, Jim, that you talked about, that's the oversight, that's what that column is oversight over all that stuff and lowering risks, right? That's important. We need to have all of these, right? And some balance of all of these. And most of the boards I've been on are more on that oversight role. You're at 100,000 feet. You may not even understand what the heck the organization does. And you don't necessarily need to be good at that side, right? It's, if you move to the left side, that's where you need to understand the mission, because you got to understand the right questions to ask, the right decisions to make. I want to move my board to move more of that over to that left side. And like I said before, we've got a lot of program changes coming up to be more involved in that on the front end, as opposed to me coming to a meeting and Mike coming to a meeting and saying, well, this is what we've decided to do.
Right.
Can you bless it? Because when you get into that situation with your board, they start to feel like they're not even needed. Why am I here? If I'm just a fiduciary check mark, kind of perfunctory vote, am I even doing anything? Right? And so some board meetings.
And you're missing out on all those great minds.
Right, so.
And it puts a lot of pressure on the management to make those decisions alone.
So, you know, that notion of moving the board to be, because there's gonna be some board members that are better at the right side, and that's fine, right? You fit there. And so in terms of trying to find new board members, I'm gonna have this in mind in terms of who fits in these buckets and get them engaged.
Thank you for
Thank you.
sharing your story.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that we have a little bit of time for questions. Are there any questions in the room?
Hey, I've
Bill?
got- just to dovetail Dave on that, because I know we run into problems with, these aren't nonprofit boards, but sometimes board members dig in too deep and cross that line into management. So I can see the benefit, but where do you draw that line? Because you don't want board members getting into your day-to-day business and
No.
slowing you down, unless there's some special need.
Yeah, no, it depends on the circumstance. It depends on, because the folks that I have in our housing, they've spent 20 years in housing. They're gonna know more than any board member's gonna know.
Right.
And so you can draw that line by how you engage with the board and what your expectations are. And the key relationship is with the board chair. I mean, the board chair has to be the individual that is directing kind of the traffic from the board perspective. And so you need to really be very selective in terms of who your board chair is. It's really important. You can't do, I don't want to be that CEO that the board just says, well, he's really the board chair kind of thing, or he's making the decisions. That puts me at risk. I don't want to have that responsibility because it's not my responsibility, right? But I think the board chair is very important, but also this notion of finding folks in these buckets, because you may want them in your business on the generative side, helping you make decisions. You know, or you might want them just in the oversight side, blessing what you do. But that communication is key. And we've done a lot better job with that in terms of getting them in the mix, because there's a lot of things they're learning as well. There's a lot, you know, the existing board members are learning as well.
I guess I have a question, and maybe Kaydee, you can kind of give us your thoughts, but I do like the idea of having people on the board that have certain experiences with the organization. We do a lot of work with the American Printing House for the blind, and I thought it was great that they actually, one of their bylaws is that they have a visually impaired person on the board, and that just makes a lot of sense. I guess when the bylaws for the board, diversity should be more than just race and color and gender. I guess, do we recommend, is that best practice to have a bunch of these, you know, other things in the bylaws to what the people that should be on the board, or what do you see?
I think that that's a fine line. You know, you do want to address, I think something like your constituency, I oftentimes do see codified in the bylaws. If you're a school having a certain number of parents, you know, a certain percentage of your board being made up of parents. If you're an organization that serves the community, having representation from that community on your board. I do see that oftentimes written into bylaws. I would not recommend writing something into bylaws like race, gender, religion, if it's a faith-based organization, that might be part of your bylaws and you'd be fine with that. But otherwise, those become the things that you just want to make sure are part of your institutional history and part of your commitment as a board member to sustain.
I was surprised to hear you have 24 board members. I'm curious how you balance like active participation and efficiency.
Yeah, I wish I had less. You get a quorum, and we just had a board meeting. And, you know, it works pretty good. We will have less. The reason I have that many right now, and I could have up to 30. I wouldn't want that. But it's there to be, bylaws should be flexible. So build things into policies and procedures outside of the bylaws so you can have flexibility. But, you know, there's gonna be 15 rolling off in 2 years. So we're managing that size. They will add a few more, but I think 19 or 20 would be a nice number, because it's hard. I mean, it's hard for quorums, it's hard, you know, every vote that we put things to has been unanimous. We haven't had trouble with that kind of thing, but I'm not sure what the right number is, but it's probably less than 24, in my opinion.
I have a question about board terms. You mentioned, is it correct that everyone goes off at the same date, same year? They're not staggered like
No, it's
5?
staggered. It's just that we have those folks that were existing board members
Okay.
when we instituted the term limits.
But then it'll be.
That'll be classes.
Julia, did you have something online?
I did, we got someone from the chat. First they said, well done, Dave and St. Vincent de Paul. The work is hard, we are exhausted, but yet we keep moving forward. I am with the Emergency Shelter of Northern Kentucky. We also see that there is enough income-based, wage-based housing and hard to pay frontline staff when funding is not prioritized on a federal level.
I think we could all concur.
Oh, not enough wage-based. Thank you, Kim.
Yeah, I mean, we're not alone, right?
No.
We're not alone. That's why I mean, this is our community though, so come on down, I'll take you around. You'll truly walk away and say, wow, I didn't know this was going on, I didn't know you all were doing this, kind of thing.
Questions? And to that end, I did put a plug in here for your
Okay, yeah.
Director of Conference Affairs and Volunteer Services. That's a nice long title you gave her.
Yeah. Does a lot, been there 17 years, yeah.
For one, Dave, I've seen you utilize social media to get the message out, podcasts in different forms, but just media in general, how have you embraced that, and has the media been welcoming of your message, which I hope they are?
Yeah, they are, and there's no shortage of that. And you will see if you go to our website, there, yeah, just svdplu.org. You go to the website, we've got a podcast series. When I first got there, I was told, we're the best kept secret in town, isn't that great? Nope. So I said, let's do a podcast. I'm the host, and we actually just moved to the last one we taped was with the founder of LDG Development. They're the largest developer of affordable housing in the country, and their offices are on 3rd Street, right by U of L. And it's St. X grads that started it, and we did a podcast actually in a studio. So it's going to be taped as well as, and we're going to push it out in different places. We've got a new public relations individual that's really good with all that. Because we know too, just like anything else, the donor population is getting older. It's like when you go to your place of worship, you look around, it's starting to get older. And we got to hit the younger folks and get them interested in this. And I'm encouraged by that, because I think a lot of the younger generation are focused on these kinds of things. And so we're going to be using social media for that. We've cut a lot of our radio advertising. It just wasn't working. People weren't responding to the radio advertising. And so we're doing more with social media, Facebook, Instagram, all that stuff.
That's where having fresh board members, I think, sometimes brings some of these
Right.
new ideas.
But take a listen to some of the podcasts. They're pretty cool. We've got some nationally renowned folks that are on there that have NYU, from Princeton, an author out in the West Coast that wrote a really great book on homelessness, the Eviction Lab. We're trying to be informative with it and then plug us as well.
Well, thank you for joining us tonight. I'd like to invite everyone to stay for, we are actually doing a session on Sage Intact, a demonstration, and we have food for those of you that are here. Feel free to join us for that event, and if you're online, just stay on the same webinar and have that opportunity to see Sage Intact in action for nonprofits. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
More than just our one season.